Okay. So now we will repeat the program.
Oh, yun ang pirma.
Good day and welcome to Enriching Public Governance in GOCCs, brought to you by Phoenix in partnership with ICD and ISA. Before we start, please join us in prayer and the singing of the Philippine National Anthem. Dear God, thank you for allowing us to meet at today's event. May you extend your divine wisdom to our speakers so they may be able to impart their knowledge and expertise. Bless all the participants that they will obtain vital information from this event, that they will go out and share what they had learned. In the spirit of your love and generosity, may this activity glorify your name alone. Amen. Let us now call the Master of Ceremonies. She is the Vice Chair of the Good Governance Committee, Ms. Riza B. Latorre.
Trustees of Phoenix, the officers of Good Governance Committee of Phoenix. Good afternoon, everyone. And we are so pleased and excited to hear and learn from everyone this afternoon. So this is the second of the four, I believe, that the Good Governance Committee has prepared for this year, and it is a very timely and relevant topic. And I hope those joining us online, which I believe is almost 150 people already, I hope you can feel the excitement that we are experiencing here in the room now, because as I've said, this is very timely and very relevant. So the title of our forum for this afternoon is Enriching Public Governance in GOCCs. And to officially open our forum, may I call on Mr. Wilson Tan, Phoenix President and UI Assurance Country Managing Director.
Thank you and good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure and privilege to welcome you all and thank you for taking time out. I know you were all busy. Welcome to this forum entitled Enriching Public Governance in Government-Owned and Controlled Corporation. At PHINEX, we constantly work toward financial inclusion and social equity. This undertaking is a collaborative process, which is why we are working with various sectors to help achieve our sustainable growth and inclusion goals for the country. In light with this, we have invited esteemed panel of guests to share their valuable insight this afternoon. I would like to extend my gratitude to the speakers for taking time out of their busy schedule to be with us. This forum will touch on different ways that private and public sectors can work together to create a more effective and robust governance policies in public sphere. As the nation continually grapples with issues such as COVID-19 recovery, corruption, inflation, and poverty, working together and finding long-term solutions is imperative. Specifically, we should collaborate and bolster efforts with our government-owned and controlled corporations. First and foremost, our GOCCs must be underpinned by good governance. Good governance entails accountability, efficiency, and transparency. And this practice sets the standards for the nation's growth and development. Creating comprehensive, effective, sustainable policies and processes will be crucial to inclusive growth and poverty reduction. However, problems such as corruption and unemployment continue to weaken our nation. Corruption is a systemic issue that requires multifarious solutions. And as such, we cannot be complacent because inaction can hurt the vulnerable. On behalf of PHINEX, the Institute of Corporate Directors, and the Institute for Solidarity in Asia, we hope that you will find this afternoon session enlightening and also helpful. So welcome to this forum.
Thank you, Wilson. We cannot wait to hear and listen and learn from our distinguished speaker. And to introduce him, may I call on Miss sorry. Kathy? Yes. And may I call on Miss Kathy Ang, our lady boss from Good Governance Committee and Executive Director and Chief Audit Executive of Ayala Corporation.
Thanks, Lisa. Good afternoon, everyone, and I hope you're all as excited as I am to listen to our distinguished and powerhouse on good governance speakers. So more than 15 years ago, I had the privilege of listening and learning from our keynote speaker when he opened the professional development program of Institute of Corporate Directors for batch 13 or class of 2007. Again, I had the privilege of learning and working with him when then as chairperson of the Institute of Internal Auditors Philippines, we were tapped to help the Institute of Solidarity in Asia to validate the performance governance system of national agencies and local government units. And again, he invited me to be one of the panelists in the National Government Unit's Revalida for Island of Good Governance. To this day, I am in awe of him and the work that he is doing, focused on improving governance in the Philippines for both the public and the private institutions as a way of reducing corruption in our country. So Dr. Jess or Jesus P. Stanislao is currently the chairman of the Center for Excellence in Governance. He is the emeritus holder of the Institute of Corporate Directors Chair and the Institute for Solidarity in Asia and Advocacy for Public Governance. Through these two institutes, of which he was the founding chairman, he has been a leading figure for governance reforms in the Philippines. Through them, he has been working with similar institutes in Southeast Asia and the Philippine expert in the Asian Corporate Governance Scorecard Initiative. He has served in the academe, government, and the private business sector, and he was the founding president of the University of Asia and the Pacific in Manila. He has served as the Minister of Finance of the Philippines after serving as Minister of Economic Development under President Corazon Aquino. He capped his banking career as chairman and CEO of the Development Bank of the Philippines after having served as president of Associated Bank and chairman of the Philippine Commercial and Industrial Bank. Friends and colleagues, please help me welcome the foremost advocate and a major force in advancing good governance in our country, Dr. Jess Stanislao.
Thank you very much, Kathy. President Wilson Tan, the convener of this forum, Baby Mesa, my fellow speakers, Dean Cesar Villanueva, and just reminded there are 3 lawyers who are going to speak after me. It's sufficiently intimidating. And Attorney Hernandez, Attorney Gutierrez, ladies and gentlemen, members of PINEX. Baby Nuesa has irresistible powers. When she asks, it's very difficult to resist. But when she shared with me the exchange of messages and conversations you had in Phoenix and other circles, I was dismayed. I must confess to a certain degree of disillusion. And therefore, I thought back many years ago, and I wanted to share this with you. I was with Jobo Fernandez. May God bless his soul. He was the governor of the central bank. He was the DVP. We're negotiating after a very strenuous session with the World Bank and a number of our creditors. Jobo turned to me and he said, "Yes, promise me. For the rest of your life, you must help make sure that we do not get back to the situation where we have found ourselves." So it is not only because of the graciousness of Baby that I'm here, I'm also trying to redeem a promise that I gave to Joe, that I will continue to work against corruption and therefore for good governance. From the exchanges that you have been having, I can, where do I turn this? Get back that in fact corruption is back. And not only is it back, but it is coming in a big way, in a much bigger way. And to a situation, we have got into a situation where many of us, in effect, are asking, what can we do about it? Now, you're Phoenix members, you're responsible members of the business community. but not everybody is a Phoenix member. And therefore, I must say, over lunch, about a week ago, I was with a number of professionals, some of them very highly educated. And we're talking about corruption going on. And the response that I got was, it's normal. It's a way of life. They just laughed about it. And I said to myself, this cannot be. We have to, in fact, elevate our sense of outrage. Because in effect, wow, I have music. Because corruption is a crime against our people. And it is happening every day. And what we're doing is, in effect, simply laughing at it, tolerating it, and in fact, saying, well, that's the way how things are. It cannot be, we cannot do things the way we have been doing in the past or currently. So we've got to fight against corruption. Now, there are many ways of looking at corruption. And I must say that the very first thing that we need to do is what you do. Exchange notes, raise the level of outrage, and at some point, get back to the outrage that we had when we, in effect, went to EDSA, we said, tama na, sobra na. Or when we went to the Luneta and rallied against Janet Napoles and saying, hey, that's our money that is being stolen and stuffed into the pockets of people. So we've got to continue doing this conversation and in effect, giving what they say in church circles, a conscientization very much against corruption. But we cannot stop there. For the simple reason that corruption is only one side of the coin. The other side is good governance. I've had a long conversation with one of the leading experts against corruption. He used to be the president of Claremont University, Bob Klitgard, and he had this very famous formula about what corruption is. It really has three major elements, which means quite a lot of monopoly, quite a lot of discretion, lack of transparency, and lack of accountability. And I looked at that formula and said, hey, that's the formula that we have. Turning it around to good governance. We're talking about accountability, transparency, and therefore openness, fairness, as little of the monopoly that we used to be seeing in our midst. So when we talk about corruption, let's rail against it. But let's not forget that, for example, in the 1960s, when the first President Marcos was campaigning for the presidency, he had a movie made, and it was entitled, For Every Tear, a Victory. Now, corruption leads us to tears. But maybe there's another thing that we can do outside of campaign against corruption. And that is, let's build various platforms of good governance, which in effect highlight victory against corruption. And that is what I'd like to encourage you in Phoenix to do. Not only to campaign, but also to begin focusing your spotlight on the good governance stories that are being written, that are being done all throughout this country. Because for every corruption misdeed, there should be many more good governance deeds. For every evil that we see, we must drown all of that in a sea of good governance deeds. And therefore, the second thing I would like to bring to your attention is spotlight the stories of good governance that it disappeared, my stories, that are being done in this country. And what we do is go institution by institution, individual to individual, and create an environment where an entire industry, an entire sector is affected. These are some of the stories. You have been exchanging notes about the comments of City Mayor Benji Magalong of Baguio City. Wonderful guy. We used to work with him when he was in the PNP. Now he's the mayor of Baguio. Amazing. What that guy has been able to do in 4 years as city mayor of Baguio. And some of you may be asking, can anything good come out of Cebu, outside of Domingo? And you have the city of Mandaue, that is bringing good governance and responsible citizenship, not down to the last barangay, but every block in the city, and it's transforming the city. And you might want to visit La Union, the province of La Union. Amazing what the governor has been able to do there for the past 6 years to 7 years. Stories like this are many. An example that I would like to give is the Philippine Heart Center. For many years, they were grappling with how to improve systems and procedures. Finally, they said, help us. And we helped them. They transformed the Philippine Heart Center. They did not stop there. They said, let's share our expertise, our experience with all of the public sector hospitals associated with DOH. And I can tell you as we speak, 68 of the 70 public hospitals associated with DOH spread throughout the country are doing some good governance work, delivering good governance results, and that's all. Their stories must be told. But what we hear of is corruption, corruption, corruption. We cannot close our eyes to it. But maybe it's about time that we begin opening our eyes to the many good things that are being done in this country about good governance and proper transformation. Now, we cannot stop there. We cannot just sort of tell stories. We'll have to get involved in promoting good governance. And here I would like to address Phoenix first as individual members and later on as an organization. What can you individually do? One is perhaps to volunteer and participate in some of the big things that are being done, for example, in this country. Dave Simpson, you know Dave Simpson very well. He's leading a big group, bringing government together, the business community, and the civil society organization on one big problem that is confronting this country and confronting the world. And that is we're running out of water. And the Philippines, we just throw water away, and the rains come, we suffer from floods. And what Babes is saying is that we can simply use 20% of the flood control money that is allocated every year. And we'll be able to secure clean water for every Filipino, and possibly in the future, export water to other countries that are running. This is a big undertaking, endorsed by government, with the private sector involved, and civil society organizations involved. Many Phoenix members can in fact volunteer and help in this initiative. Another one is Rex Trilon, who is doing work with the Archdiocese of Manila, Translacion. Their idea is to bring transformation down to the last parish. And we started working with some 20 parishes. It's amazing. The things that are going on, the enthusiasm that is going on, the will of the people to start and do something for their respective communities so that they will be more in line with the ideas and the principles and the guidelines enunciated by Pope Francis. We have 70 parishes more to go, in addition to the 20. Rex is asking for volunteers to have each one of these parishes move forward on a coordinated basis so that we can transform every parish in the Archdiocese of Manila. And one need not speak about very big projects. This is very simple connecting the dots project. You and I can do it. Jeff Barreto, during the COVID lockdown, he organized a group of farmers that could not move their products because of travel restrictions. And then consumers in Manila who are in need of food, what he did is connect the dots, raised the income that farmers could have, and brought down the price of farm commodities sold in markets. Typical example of a solidarity initiative. I urge every one of you to participate, to volunteer, to help in many of these initiatives or the great initiatives in the world. Let me now go into what Phoenix itself can do. And that is, the first one is with GCG. As Chairman Villanueva will tell you, this is a very good law. And what we need to do is to implement it. Why can't Phoenix, together with ICD and ISA, work together with GCG so that we give impetus and give due recognition, properly audited, of all of those GOCCs that fully implement and make the full demands of the GCG law. This is good governance in action. And we have the law in place. The only thing we need to do is to make sure that in fact we can push all of the good parties that want to do something about the GOCCs and raise them to the standards as negotiated and as mandated by you. This can easily be done. Phoenix can take the lead together with GCG and with the assistance of ISA and GCG. Another is with the Securities and Exchange Commission. ICD has been working with SEC. Wonderful work. We have managed to elevate more than 20 of our publicly listed companies to the top ranks of ASEAN. They can compete with any ASEAN publicly listed company. Singapore, as a matter of fact, the first list that came out, we beat Singapore in the number of corporations that were included in the top ASEAN PLCs with respect to corporate governance. We beat Malaysia. We're number 2 to Thailand. And we can increase this, but beyond simply increasing the number. Let's go beyond components. Let's now use governance as a tool for delivering performance, not only for the shareholders, not only for the stakeholders, but the Philippines taken as a whole. This is where ESG comes into the picture and social responsibility, where we undertake socio-economic projects, not only for our profitability, but for the benefit of the Philippines. This is good governance. This is anti-corruption. This is the antidote to the many things that we're complaining about. And we can do something about it with the leadership of Phoenix. And the third one, which I would like to bring up, is Phoenix leading the other business organizations, including PMAP and MAP. We can have a Philippine Hall of Fame for good governance and transformation for both public and private sectors on 3 key areas which are really important for sustained transformation and good governance programs. The first is how we are managing our human resources for the long term. This is a big issue. We're draining ourselves with people and good governance. Second, of course, what Phoenix is very good at, and that is the internal value chain, which can be, in fact, orchestrated by the finance function. And the third, together with MAP, the ESG, the social impact, the external value chain. If we put all of these things together, we will be a model for good governance. And instead of crying with a lot of tears being shed, we can have many platforms for good governance where we can celebrate victories. Thank you for your attention.
simply wow. I'm overwhelmed. I'm sure you all are. Yeah. I'm having goosebumps. Dr. Yes, Stanislaw. Every tear of victory. I actually researched when it was published. I wasn't even born. But yeah, I'm so scared. I'm so inspired. Seriously, I'm having goosebumps all over my Yeah, thank you so much for that very inspiring message, Dr. Chess, and for reminding us that we should stop complaining, instead start doing something and doing it actively, and reminding us that we can fight corruption by focusing on building the good governance individually as an organization as Phoenix, and us as private professionals, corporate leaders. Yeah, thank you so much. There's so many things that we can actually do. Thank you for the reminder. And at this point, I would like to request one of the most passionate persons I've met about good governance. She actually led the team in preparing for this forum. So let me just read some of her credentials. Thank you so much. Yep. Okay, so to introduce our set of panelists this afternoon, let me call Miss Baby Sharisa Nuesa. So she is an independent director, former ICD and Phoenix Foundation trustee. She has a lot of list of credentials, but we are reminded to keep it short. But yeah. But the most important, I think that I can tell about Baby is all throughout our preparations for this forum, she's just really very passionate. She coordinated everything, and she invited the best speakers who can share and speak about the topic this afternoon. So let me welcome on stage Miss Baby.
Thank you, Lisa. Actually, I learned all of the passion from Dr. Jess, who is my mentor in governance. I was, of course, with ICD for 9 years as a trustee, and it's really a privilege to be here to help organize this Good Governance Forum. Dr. Jess, thank you so much for everything that I've learned from you. Well, to the board of directors of Phoenix, my colleagues in Phoenix, of course, our esteemed panelists and our keynote speaker, our colleagues, my friends, ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant good afternoon. I won't go into a long opening. Everyone is looking forward to the Q&A. So I just want to remind everyone with the definition of governance under OECD, because the OECD principles have been adopted, not just by the private sector, but also by public institutions, including the government-owned and controlled corporations. So what does the governance definition say? That the purpose or objectives of governance is twofold. First is actually to build a climate of trust, accountability, and transparency. And second is to foster long-term investments, business integrity, strong enterprises, and inclusive societies. So it's a beautiful definition. And specific to GOCCs, the number one vision is to be a major instrument or a tool for national development. So with that in mind, let us already jump into the discussion by our esteemed panelists. And somebody was saying that their backgrounds alone are actually quite intimidating. So we have to start with the one who has such a long resume, but as you know, we've circulated the resume, so I'll keep it short so that we can go into the Q&A. And by the way, for the questions and answers, we encourage the people here on site to please raise your hand. You can ask the questions yourself, or we can also use the chat box to raise your questions or points of clarification or comments. Okay, our first panelist, by the way, allow me to mention all your backgrounds for all three, and then we'll call you one by one thereafter. Our first panelist is the very first chairman of the Governance Commission for GOCCs from 2016 to 2011. And indeed, his resume is so long. A distinguished law practitioner with a law firm that bears his name, an educator, dean of Ateneo Law School up to 2011, and of course, still a law professor and a proficient author of a number of law books and legal journals. Among his many awards, he was awarded by the late President Benigno Aquino III with the Presidential Medal of Merit. He remains the Executive Secretary of the Administrative Tribunal of the Asian Development Bank and is still very active in legal and management circles, also a trustee of the Justice Reform Initiative. He was an honors graduate from the Ateneo Law School and finished his Master of Laws in Harvard. Let us welcome warmly the former Cabinet Secretary, ICD Chairman, Attorney or Dean Cesar Villanueva. Our next speaker, the next panelist is, please stand and please be acknowledged. Dean Cesar. Our next speaker is from the GCG herself. She started her public service as the youngest elected provincial board member in the 2nd District of Batangas. She went on to serve different GOCCs such as the Philippine Retirement Authority, the PNOC Development and Management Corporation, and she was also a board trustee of the GSIS. She also worked with the private sector and with the law firm. A graduate of the University of the Philippines and San Beda Law, she is an advocate for women's rights and the rights of indigenous people, our type girl, and was awarded as an outstanding Woman of the Year by the province of Batangas. Please put your hands together for the GCG Commissioner, Geraldine Gigi Martinez. And then, of course, our speaker from the Securities and Exchange Commission, certainly last but not the least, has an extensive record in public service and legal practice. Before his appointment to the SEC in March 2022, he served as the Deputy Executive Secretary for General Administration, or DESGA, and in the Legal Affairs team, both under the Office of the President. Our speaker likewise served on the governing boards of different GOCCs, including the Laguna Lake Development Authority, the Development Academy of the Philippines, and the Philippine Center for Economic Development. He graduated cum laude from the University of the Philippines with a Bachelor of Arts degree and finished law with second honors at the Ateneo de Manila. Let's welcome SEC Commissioner McGill Bryant Fernando. So may we now have our first speaker, Dean Cesar Villanueva.
Thank you, baby. President Chairman, Papa Jess, and my esteemed fellow panelists, members of the board of Phoenix, and all in attending. Good afternoon. The theme this morning is enriching public governance in GOCCs, and my talk actually covers an extension of that, being how enriching corporate governance in the public sector has in turn enriched the corporate governance principles under the revised corporation code, which dovetails everything quite well because we do have the commissioners from both the GCG and the SEC. I have requested Mylene to actually email to the attendees the full text of the presentation so that I can limit myself to just 10 minutes, because the talk of our regulators is more important than the prologue that I'm just about to give. It's good that Trustee Baby had in fact defined corporate governance in the private sector. And therefore, if you go through the GOCC Governance Act of 2011, we would come out with a definition of public corporate governance as follows. Next slide, please.
The term public corporate governance, as it applies to GOCCs and GFIs, may be defined as the set of policies, rules, and processes by which the state, acting through the governing boards and management of each government corporation, manage and control public resources to achieve the objectives of sustainable delivery of programs and services to the public. You'll notice from that, if you distill the coverage of public corporate governance in as you draw it out from the provisions of Republic Act 101-409, you'll notice that it basically champions the stakeholders theory. Whereas in the private corporate sector, the primary obligation of the board and management is basically the maximization of shareholders' value. And in addition, because of corporate governance, taking into account the interests of other stakeholders. But if you look at the obligation of the board and management in the private corporate sector, about 80% of that is towards maximization of shareholders' value. And therefore, the rest is saying how to comply with the related interests of shareholders. If you look at the definition of corporate governance, I should derive it from Republic Act 101-409, it's the other way around. In other words, although the state is the principal equity holder of GOCCs and GIFs, and I mentioned them separately because you notice that banks are governed both by the BSP, which is commercial endeavor in essence, and also by the corporate government banks by the Republic Act 101-409. Their governing boards and management are mandated to manage the monies and properties for the fulfillment of the social function objectives, which is the sustainable delivery of programs and services to the public. In other words, judicious use of public monies and properties is the aim of the state, and although GOCCs are encouraged to remit dividends to the national treasury, the main purpose of every GOCC and the government in establishing and operating GOCCs is to service public welfare in a sustainable manner. You notice, therefore, the stakeholder interest, the welfare of the public is more important than the investment interest of the state. In fact, the state does not have a clear direct investment interest to the profit. As you will see every year, it even subsidizes many of the GOCCs in order to achieve public ends. With this in mind, therefore, you will notice that the stakeholders theory, which is the underpinning basis by which corporate governance reform in the private sector has taken a meaningful role and expression in the GOCC sector. And because of that, go ahead, please. The promulgation in 2011 of a Republic Act 101-409, or the GOCC Governance Act of 2011 has in fact raised the bar of excellence of corporate governance in the GOCC sector, and few people realize this at a much higher bar than that of public corporate governance in the private sector. First of all, there's a declaration of policy, the Act's declaration of policy provides for full implementation of the stakeholders theory versus the doctrine of maximization of shareholder value. Compared to the private sector's primary objective of maximizing the shareholders' value with due regard to the interests of other stakeholders, which is the mantra that was first developed by PSE, in fact, in the GOCC sector, the primary obligation of the governing boards and management are to promote financial viability and fiscal discipline of the GOCC and strengthen the role of the state in governance and management to make the GOCC sector more responsive to the needs of the public interest. Second, to actively exercise the government's ownership rights in GOCC to promote growth by ensuring that operations are consistent with national development policies and programs. Government and that direction is clearly expressed in our Constitution, in the 1987 Constitution. Section 16, Article 12 of the Constitution, in fact, says that government-owned or controlled corporations may be created or established by special charters in the interest of the common good and subject to the test of economic viability. In other words, if a GOCC is going to be organized under the revised corporation code or given by special charter by legislature, it is not the commercial operations that is important at all. In fact, it shouldn't be. The legality or constitutionality of creating such a GOCC that only has commercial endeavors in mind would be unconstitutional under the rule mandated by Section 16, Article 12 of the 1987 Constitution, right? The government has no business being in business unless business is meant to enhance economic public welfare. Pure stakeholder theory doctrine. Next slide, please. In comparison with the comply or explain approach by which corporate governance is done in the publicly listed, the publicly held companies in the private corporate sector, GOCCs and directors, GOCC directors, trustees, and officers are dubbed as fiduciaries of the state. They're public officials, so to speak, bounded by the highest degree of extraordinary diligence and encompassed with the duty to act in the best interest of the state. You notice that in both civil and corporate, under the revised corporation code, the degree of diligence that's required of directors, trustees, and officers is the diligence of a very prudent man. In the GOCC sector, the diligence that's required is extraordinary diligence. The GOCC directors and officers, the duty to act with extraordinary diligence, with in the utmost good faith, not just good faith, as to amount to such degree of diligence that requires using the utmost diligence of a very cautious man, not just the prudence of a good father of family, but very cautious man with due regards to, for all the circumstances. And a definition has been inputted in the GOCC GCG circular that covers that. It's quoted in the write-up. So, if you come to think of it, this extraordinary diligence mantra that is imposed upon directors and officers has in fact been carried into the revised corporation code. And how has that been? For the first time, the revised corporation code has begun to formally accept a classification of GOCCs that are private corporations that are called corporations vested with public interest. And corporations vested with public interest is a term in jurisprudence that says banks, insurance companies, financing companies, hospital are being invested with public interest because you invite the public, and the public must, in all instances, common carriers avail of their services, right? And therefore, in order to protect the public interest, who are bound to avail of their public interest, they must be bounded by extraordinary diligence. And the rule that is used by the Supreme Court is that the moment one avails, for example, of a common carrier's public transport, all he has to do is that he entered into a contract to be transported, and then during the term of the contract, he endured an injury, he suffered an injury, and automatically the law says that they have not complied with extraordinary diligence, the company is already at fault. And that has already been, by the revised corporation code, recognizing that special classifications of corporations vested with public interest, then it has ushered into the private corporations the extraordinary diligence that's required of officers and members that has been affirmed by the Supreme Court in its recent decision. Second is the board of directors are mandated, are now expressly bounded by a duty to appoint competent officers. It's like, and that's a special kind of duty that is found in Republic Act 10149 that is not clear in the old corporation code, right? And that means that they become, to a certain extent, that's almost command responsibility. That if you don't choose competent officers to run the affairs of the GOCC, then the board must suffer also certain liabilities under the command responsibility of issues. That has in turn moved what we call in the a movement in the revision of the old corporation code, because now there is an express recognition that officers are bound to comply with their duties in accordance with the resolutions of the board of directors, recognizing therefore that provision. The breach of duties for GOCC directors are criminally punishable, unlike under the old corporation code where breach of fiduciary duties brought about only personal civil liabilities. The old corporation code does not have a criminal sanction except one that is a general coverage that has been struck down by the Supreme Court. But in a GOCC setting, because officers, directors, and trustees are deemed to be public officers, then they're bound by provisions that supplement their criminal liability, such as the Anti-Corrupt Graft and Corrupt Practices Act and the Code of Conduct for public officials. Therefore, when they do an act that violates their duty, let's say, of loyalty under the old corporation code, their liability would only be civil in character, to disgorge, for example, to return what they have received. But when you're a GOCC, you're a director, a defaulting director, a culprit director is not only bound to return to the government what he has taken, the monies that are supposed to be public in character, but he becomes criminally liable. So you notice that directors of GOCCs and officers of GOCs and even employees of GOCCs, being public officials, are bounded by that criminal liability for breach of duties of diligence, loyalty, and even obedience, right? And that has in turn, the Republic Act 10149 that criminalizes breach of the duties of fiduciary duties has found an expression under the revised corporation code. For now, there are specific provisions in the revised corporation code that provides for criminal sanctions being imposed upon both the corporation, its directors and officers that have, for example, entered into fraudulent transactions, that have allowed the corporation to be used as an intermediary in graft and corrupt practices and things like that. So that seems to be like an inspiration coming from Republic Act 10149, where the degree of compliance with the corporate governance principle, its breach is not only civil and commercial in character, but it is also criminal in character. Whether people agree with the criminalization of corporate governance principle in the private sector is quite another matter, right? But that's a debate that continues to unfold. The second is the fourth is the express duty in dealings with GOCC properties and monies with the obligation of restitution, which may be criminally punished. In private corporate governance, it is not clear whether the money that the company monies and properties that directors deal with is something that is covered, or the duties are those of a trustee, right? In GOCC, there's a definition that not only are directors and officers deemed to be trustees of the government funds and properties, but that anything that they take is deemed to be, they take it as a trust that they're bound to give back to the government. And failure to do so, to restitute, is subject to criminal punishment. And then there's the express duty in dealing with GOCC properties and money. All right. And the GOCC directors and officers are bound by the duties to disclose important personal in corporate data. Public officers, GOCC directors, officers, are public officers under the revised administrative code, they're required to do their salary. If they don't, they're really subject to the penalty imposed by law. Right? And then they're bound to provide in their websites and other submissions to both the GCG and to the state. They're bound to reveal important data that pertains to the corporation so that the public is in a position to resolve and to guard, right? That has in turn come into the revised corporation code provisions that were passed later on. Today, the revised corporate, and you'll see it in the write-up, there are 3 provisions in the revised corporation code now that obliges the corporation and the board to share with the public the compensation that each director or trustee and officer has received under pains of criminal prosecution if you don't do so. They're also bound to do an evaluation, which we'll take up later on, of the performance, yearly performance of directors and trustees, and they're bound to publish this and give them to the public. Next slide, please. Right. In comparison, right. And then we have the mandated performance evaluation that I was talking about. It is the basis by which the GOCC can receive their performance-based bonus and performance-based incentive if they could comply with this. And then the putting of what we call a unified compensation and position classification system, CPCS, in the whole GOCC sector, both chartered and unchartered. What is the primary intention of this? The intention is to remove from operation the Supreme Court decisions that said that corporations, government corporations that are organized under the old corporation code are deemed to be private corporations, and therefore terms of employment and benefits are governed by the Labor Code of the Philippines. Through Republic Act 10149, all GOCs, whether chartered or unchartered, have been grouped into a single CPCS system that allows legislature acting through GCG to provide a system, limiting their incentives, not anymore allowing them to engage in collective bargaining agreement with their board of directors. And just a few, one more slide. Next slide, please. Right. This will be discussed, of course, by Commissioner Martinez, but the GCG has been granted awesome powers. You look at the law. That was one that attracted me to accept the offer of then Senator Dillon to take it up, right? Awesome powers, right? And then when we began to speak with the GOCC sector, we said, we have so much power. We have the power of life and death over you. We have the power of life and death over the GOCCs because we can declassify, we can privatize you. And with such awesome powers, we would tell them, how can we serve you? Right? We were there to use the awesome powers granted to us in order to make GOCCs more effective, so to speak. We're not here to kill you unless necessary. We're here to use our awesome powers in order to serve you, right? Awesome powers. And because we have the power of life and death economically and professionally over the GOCCs and their directors, they would follow us. And the Secretary of Finance then, Cesar Pulisimo, would say, but pag ako yung nagdidirect sa mga GOCCs, hindi ako pinakikinggan. At kayong mag-issue na isang memorandum lang, natatakot sila sa inyo because we have the power of life or death over them, basically, right? Awesome powers. In that, in the revision of the old corporation code, that's exactly what has come into play. Although there was a PD 902-A that provided for awesome powers to the SEC because it was disconnected with the old corporation code, the complaints of the SEC Commission then was that when we tried to enforce governance provision under the old corporation code, we were always met with what you don't have any powers under the old corporation code, right? And what our revised corporation code did was to basically copy that by saying that the SEC is the primary regulatory agency in the promotion of good corporate governance or as a sanction to its administrative proceedings, right? And you will notice some of the areas where the SEC has been given so much power to determine basically the life and death to classify corporations into corporations vested with public interest and so to speak. And you will notice therefore that when the SEC now talks on the basis of corporate governance as provided by statutory law, it talks with authority, with power, and therefore publicly held companies must face up and listen to SEC. Otherwise, SEC has the power and light over their careers, so to speak, like blacklisting and disqualifying them forever. Right? And that is how enriching corporate governance in the public sector, corporate sector has in turn enriched corporate governance in the private corporate sector, as shown by the latest amendments to the old corporation code, now found under the revised corporation code. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Dean Cesar. We just had two powerful speeches. Well, our keynote speaker, of course, talked about what we can do. It was a call to action, and of course, discussed the values and principles of governance. Our next speaker, the first GCG chair, told us why and what are the underpinnings of these governance rules describing the law and the principles. And as a matter of fact, he also sent us a 10-page analysis of his presentation, which, ladies and gentlemen, you're getting for free from Phoenix. So our next speaker now is the one with awesome power, as described by our ICD chair. And the awesome powered speaker, by the way, is someone you really have to listen to. Why? Because, well, there are only 3 commissioners in GCG, of course, led by Chair Alex Quiroz. But let me just say, because Phoenix, by the way, is one of the organizations who was really watching the Maharlika Investment Fund. Now, the law, RA 11954, or the Maharlika Investment Corporation, or the MIF law, actually says very specifically that the Maharlika Investment Corporation shall be under the GCG. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's now listen to the one
Operation pinaka-irman karon ba? Lima ka mo.
the one
Operation.
with awesome power.
Halos operation ka na ng
Thank you, Ms. KB. Ms. Risa, inuna syempre ang mga babae. Chairman Jess, it's such an honor to have heard you speak, and I found it very, very inspiring. Naalala ko tuloy yung tumakbo pala ako, ma'am, as a provincial board member, because my name is Gigi. I was shouting for good governance way back in 1995. Yes. Of course, Commissioner of SEC, Commissioner Fernandez, the President of Phoenix, President Wilson Tan. I am very, very nervous today, not only because Chairman Jess is here, but also because one of my, the number one critic in our barkada is here, Tony Boy Ongshao. But most of all, because the father, we fondly call him the father of GCG, the very first chairman of the GCG is here, Dean Cesar Villanueva. I'm very honored to be with you today, sir. So what more can I say after Dean Villanueva has emphasized on the awesome powers of GCG? Baka akala po nila kami ang the Avengers. Pero let me just focus on the key, the core duties of GCG for the information of everyone here and those listening to us online. So, 12 years ago, we just celebrated the 12th anniversary of the GCG. The RA 1149 was signed into law to promote financial viability and fiscal discipline in the GOCCs. and to strengthen the role of the state in its governance and management to make them more responsive to the needs of public interest. To enable the state to actively exercise its ownership rights in GOCCs, the law created this awesome body, the GCG, the Governance Commission for GOCCs, which has four primary mandates. That is the Okay, sige. Let me just enumerate first. To rationalize the GOCC. First is the rationalization of the GOCC sector in line with the state's ownership policy. Number two is the nomination of appointed directors in line with the fit and proper rule. Third is the monitoring and the evaluation of the performance of GOCCs and its board of directors. And last is the standardization of the compensation systems, which Dean Villanueva mentioned earlier, the CPCS, and its board of directors to attract, retain, and motivate competent professionals and improve service delivery. Now, allow me to take the opportunity to highlight key initiatives of the GCG in pursuit of its mandates. As to the GOCC sector rationalization, in 2021, the President issued Administrative Order 44, directing the adoption and implementation of the National Competition Policy. Under this policy, the GCG is among the lead agencies in promoting competitive neutrality to foster a level playing field where GOCCs and private firms compete. Among the cross-cutting strategies in the competition chapter of the 2023 to 2028 Philippine Development Plan is that the mandates of GOCCs shall be reviewed to rationalize direct state participation in the economy. For this purpose, the GCG shall conduct a subsidiarity analysis, providing guidelines on where the presence of GOCCs is justified and where state participation should be minimized. Notably, last December, the GCG and the Philippine Competition Commission signed a memorandum of agreement for both agencies to work together in reviewing existing regulations and guidelines issued by the GCG and GOCCs to ensure that they are consistent with applicable competition laws and principles, including competitive neutrality. As to the nomination and appointment, nawala yung protege with Dean Villanueva. Next slide, please. Under the GOCC Governance Act, an appointed director shall be appointed by the President from a short list prepared by the GCG. All nominees included in the list shall meet the fit and proper rule under GCG Memorandum Circular number 2012-05, courtesy of our father of GCG, which sets the standards of integrity, experience, education, training, and competence. The law also specifically provides that the short list shall exceed by at least 50% of the number of directors or trustees to be appointed. To comply with its mandate, the GCG also issued a memorandum circular number 2012-04 outlining the shortlisting process. Under this circular, the GCG shall formally solicit nominations for all the positions of appointed directors in each of the GOCCs, primarily from the Office of the President, the supervising agency of the GOCC or its parent GOCC. Among the initiatives of the GCG, however, is maintaining a talent pool of nominees. The GCG not only receives applications from individuals to be appointed to choose GOCC boards, but also invites qualified professionals to be considered for shortlisting. And so I also take this opportunity to invite the members of Phoenix to serve on the front lines of public corporate governance. Kaya lang po medyo baka hindi lang mag-qualify under one requirement yung mga taong nandito because ang minimum requirement po din kailangan at least 30 years old po kayo. Mukhang hindi po kayo makabot doon. So, just for the information of all, at present, there are around 278 appointed directors in the GOCCs that are still on holdover positions. Holdover from the previous administration. This constitutes almost 50% of the total appointed director seats in the GOCC sector. And of these seats, 23 are chairpersons and 24 are CEOs. So baka po may mga interesado, naghahatak po kami. Hindi lang pwede nyo bang i-share sa amin yung mga nakukuha nyo from the private sector, baka kaya namin tapatan. So you may reach out to our corporate standards office, baka po sakaling may gusto na to heed the call of Chairman Jess Stanislao for public service. And as to the fourth mandate, that is the third, the performance evaluation for directors. Okay. This evaluation is done on two levels. First is at the enterprise level, and second is at the board level. The enterprise level performance is measured primarily through a performance scorecard that contains financial and non-financial indicators. Earlier this year, the present Governance Commission released an updated performance evaluation system, or the PES for GOCCs. The performance score of the GOCC in turn constitutes half of the performance score of its individual board members. The next 20% is a director performance review, whereby an individual director's performance is rated by the board chairman, his co-directors, his peers, and the subordinates, who are the senior executives of the GOCCs. The director's attendance to meetings constitute 20%, and the last 10% comes from the GOCC score in the corporate governance scorecard. Now, a small bit about the corporate governance scorecard. This was established in 2015, again, under our father, Villanueva, in collaboration with the ICB. The CGS is an evaluation tool based on existing local and globally accepted standards and practices, such as the OECD principles and the ASEAN Corporate Governance Scorecard. The CGS checks GOCC's policies and practices in terms of stakeholder relationships, disclosure and transparency, and responsibilities of the board. The CGS score is an indicator of the GOCC's level of adherence to international best practices and measures whether the GOCC has rules and practices that allow it to have a satisfactory relationship with the board, internal and external stakeholders, shareholders, and creditors. Now, the fourth key mandate of the GCG is to develop a competitive compensation and remuneration system which shall attract, retain, and motivate talent, at the same time allowing the GOCCs to be financially sound and sustainable. Dito po maraming nagalit sa amin sa GOCC sector because their take-home pay was markedly reduced because of the rationalization of the benefits that they used to get. But in the previous prior to EO 150, some GOCCs were receiving alphabet bonuses. Ibig sabihin, parang A is for apple, B is for, talagang ang dami-dami nilang bonuses. And so we came up with that rationalized compensation framework wherein lahat pare-pareho lang tayo ng matatanggap. Di ba? So dito po maraming nagre-reklamo. And for the officers and employees, this was rationalized through the CPCS, or the Compensation and Position Classification System, which became effective in October 5, 2021. Parang tumatango si Commissioner Fernandez, sila yata yung nag-approve during this time, through Executive Order number 150. There is, however, a separate compensation system for appointed board directors. The directors are compensated through per diems for attendance in board and committee meetings and a performance-based incentive should they meet the conditions for it. So this per diems are contained in EO 24, which was passed in, correct me if I'm wrong, 2010 or 2011? 2011. And so for the past 12 years, pareho pa rin po yung aming per diems. But we are in the process right now. We are in the process of procuring a third-party consultant to review, as mandated by RA 10149, that every 3 years, this CPCS will be subject to review. And so in procuring this, in the procurement of a third-party consultant, we included that EO 24 be replaced, and madagdagan naman ho ng konti yung para sa mga directors, para yung mga taga-Phoenix mag-join na sa amin. Okay, so Ms. Baby specifically mentioned to me that you would want to be apprised of the anti-corruption and integrity program of the GCG, which was launched. Hindi ko alam na may na-launch pala. But we know of this anti-corruption and integrity program primarily because, as you may know, our chairman is a former Sandigan Bayan Justice, and syempre yung anti-graft and corrupt practices ang number 1 na kaaway niya. So gusto niya ng anti-corruption and integrity program. Included under this, as I spoke before an OECD event last December, sir, on the anti-corruption program, we forwarded the adherence to the no-gift policy, sir, under naman yan, and in accordance with the CSC pronouncements. We also have a whistleblowing policy, and we already compelled all the GOCCs to have a whistleblowing portal in their websites also. And the difference being that, well, ma'am, we do not still have the meat of the programs and activities which will be under the anti-corruption and integrity program, but we would like to emphasize that we will be taking an active stance on this, because if before there was a passive as to transparency, but of course transparency will always be a primordial pillar for anti-corruption and graft. The key initiatives of the new commission is to determine whether we have learned that through the audit reports, one of the major findings of COA is the compliance with the procurement law. So we will take an active part, an active stance on that. And one of the key initiatives of the commission is to determine whether such poor performance in relation to procurement is due to corrupt practices or lack of competence of personnel, so that appropriate action may be undertaken to address the matter to prevent loss of public funds and curb delay in the delivery of services. And where inefficiency is due to lack of competence, the Commission can intervene through the strengthening of the procurement units of government corporations and the professionalization of its procurement personnel. Where, however, such inefficiency is found to be due to corrupt practices, then the liable personnel shall be made accountable through the filing of administrative, civil, or criminal cases. Sa pangunguna ng chairman namin daw. Okay. And also, it is noteworthy to mention that we have established a new office, which is the Disposition and Management Office. We call it DAMO. Parang hindi magandang pakinggan, pero yun na rin yun, DAMO. Because we found out that parang medyo kulang dun sa as to the disposition of assets. It opens the floodgates for corruption also. So we have that in place, and also we have placed an integrity division under the office of the General Counsel. So much work will have to be undertaken by the Commission. Please bear with us. We are less than a year in office, but we hope to work with all of you. And in closing, we aim to work together with our stakeholders, both from the government as well as the private sector. And we look forward to fruitful collaborations with PNEX, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the ICD, and the ISA for further good government, corporate governance in our GOCCs. Thank you very much, and good luck.
Thanks so much, Commissioner Gigi. That was really very encouraging, and thank you for already discussing your platforms for integrity and anti-corruption. And to the PHENEX members, for those who are interested on becoming GOCC directors, and hopefully you can sacrifice some of your fees. In case you have a question, if you can sit on the board of a private company and also with the GOCC at the same time, the answer is yes. Actually, the legal analysis of that, or the legal support of that, was done again under GCG chair Cesar Villanueva. I recall it was a 14-page ruling, and in fact, Ricky Jacinto, our former chairman of or president of ICD, was kidding me that it was the Nuesa ruling because it was actually done in my specific case. So I have done my tour of duty in government. So, but in case you're wondering, yes, you can have both positions in private and public corporations. Now, our next speaker, since we're running out of time, is another one with awesome and powers, because this is the primary regulatory agency for purposes of governance. So let's welcome SEC Commissioner Brian McGill Fernandez.
Thank you. Just in keeping with the theme of awesomeness, not that I want to claim we have awesome powers, but we want to be awesome just the same. Ma'am Baby, thank you for the generous introduction. Just earlier before we started, I was telling President Winston, when I was first handed the invitation on GOCCs and public governance, I said, what do I contribute as SEC? Maybe I'm haunted by my previous life at the Office of the President. To my fellow speakers, President Dr. Chesinan is now, Chairman Cesar Villanueva, Commissioner Martinez, good afternoon, officers of the PHENEX. Thank you for organizing this event. Not to take away anything from the invaluable insights of Dr. Chess and Chairman Martinez, but when Dean Villanueva was giving his talk, I was inclined to take down notes as I was afraid I might get called for recitation. He was my idol and professor back at the law school. Now, today I want to
to look at corporate governance principles and how basically it takes a specific form once local regulatory authorities implement them. I have some slides, I promise, but just in the interest of time, broadly, corporate governance involves a set of relationships between stakeholders, shareholders, companies management. And good corporate governance aims to create an environment of trust, of integrity, of responsible decision-making. There you go. Which ultimately leads to sustainable growth and value creation for all stakeholders. Precisely, international principles on corporate governance should not be looked upon as providing a rigid checklist or an exclusive checklist. It does not provide detailed descriptions. It takes into account local nuances, and that it must be seen as a set of outcomes. We can go to the second slide. Set of outcomes and objectives. The adoption of corporate governance related regulations must take into account the context, the local context, the domestic context, respect to the level, or take into account the level of financial markets and local and regulatory dimensions. The form of regulation should be appropriate to the context of entities. And precisely, if you look at our codes of corporate governance, you look at the comply or explain approach, even when you look at the formulation of the ASEAN Corporate Governance Scorecard, that's why we have a lot of debates. ICD would know this. It's precisely because we are taking into account the local nuances, the local regulations of those involved, while we have the trust of arriving at some international baseline or some international standard in the region. In the Philippines, for instance, adoption of corporate governance related practices and principles were informed not only by international best practices, but also by our experience, say in the 1997 financial crisis or 2007 global financial crisis. Next slide. Corporate governance, or inherent in corporate governance objectives, is the recognition that well-designed corporate governance policies can play an important role in contributing to the achievement of broader economic objectives. And precisely, you have the objectives of accountability to ensure the company management is responsible to stakeholders and shareholders for their actions. You have the objectives of sustainability, that instead of just looking at short-term objectives, we look at long-term success and sustainability of the company. We look at transparency, so that to ensure that financial and non-financial information is reported and disclosed to stakeholders. You have an objective of fairness, to ensure that all stakeholders, shareholders, are treated equitably, are treated fairly. You have the objective of protection of shareholders' rights, to ensure that you safeguard the right of shareholders and ensure that their interests are taken into account in company discussions. Risk management, to implement effective risk management practices, to identify and assess risks that the company may face. Ethical conduct, to encourage ethical behavior and responsible decision-making at all levels. Compliance, of course, to ensure compliance with statutory and regulatory guidelines. And we see a lot of commonalities between, say, the Code of Corporate Governance, next slide, with the Code of Corporate Governance for PLCs and even the revised corporate code, the revised Code of Corporate Governance for other covered corporations. You have provisions or sections on the responsibilities of the board, risk management,
Next slide na daw.
transparency,
Next na ba yan?
stakeholders,
Ayan.
discussed by Dean Villanueva. You have sections on the duties or the fiduciary duties of directors and officers, the duty of loyalty, the duty of diligence imposed upon directors and officers. And you also have, say, powers to create committees, audit committees, remuneration committees, etc. Next slide. Next slide. The idea, and this is what I submit, is that despite different approaches, is that we have or we adopt same principles. Say, for instance, in the revised corporation code, section 22 says that you need to have at least 20% of your board to be independent directors. And this involves corporations with public interest, those listed in exchange, those with assets of 50 million, and with 200 shareholders having 1,100 shares each, your banks, your other corporations vested with public interest. In the memorandum circular of the SEC, or memorandum circular 19, series of 2016, reinforcing recommendation 5.1, we said that the board should have at least 3 independent directors, or at least you have 1/3 of the members of the board. But under the GCG Act or under your RA 10149, you have no specific provision on the appointment of independent directors. Provisions are limited to the appointment of the board of directors by the president from a short list made by the GCG. Does this mean then that regulations on GOCCs are less stringent than that of PLCs and other private corporations? Or does it mean then that on the flip side, are there regulations that are more stringent for PLCs or for GOCCs compared to PLCs? And we say not necessarily. One, when you talk about GOCCs, they're also subject to other laws. They're subject to liabilities under your Graft and Corrupt Practices Act. They are subject to your Freedom of Information Bill. You're subject to codes of corporate governance for GOCCs. You are to require file their SALN, etc., etc. Or are they more stringent? You say under the code of corporate governance for GOCCs, you said the corporate governance standards for directors and officers of GOCCs should not be less rigorous than that required of other regulated entities of the SEC. Another thing to note is that well-designated or well-designed corporate governance principles or policies contribute to access to financing. Let's say, for instance, well-designed corporate governance policies help companies access the capital markets. Corporate governance affects the cost at which companies can access their capital for growth. We see then that there's some policing that goes on with adoption or non-adoption of corporate governance relative to the market. The Code of Corporate Governance for PLCs in theory capitalizes on the power of the market to discipline corporations. Obviously, this is not applicable to GSCCs, given that at present there are no GOCCs listed in the stock exchange. But we say then that is it more rigorous? Say, for instance, you have liabilities of GOCC directors and employees. Of course, you have the DOLI, the concept of the directors and officers liability insurance. That's attempts to cushion the effects of liability. But what we say at the bottom line is that looking at corporate governance as a step of desired outcomes and objectives, not as a rigid specific checklist, implies that in general, approaches in the implementation may vary, but we're nevertheless informed by the same set of principles of diligence, principles of loyalty to the corporation, accountability. Again, when you talk about codes of corporate governance for GOCCs vis-a-vis codes of corporate governance for PLCs, we say that while there are varying approaches in implementation, we nonetheless adopt the same set of principles. There's a question raised to us when, for example, regulations of the SEC say on material related party transactions, and the SEC has issued regulations for PLCs on this. Is this something that can be applied, or is this something that is similarly enforceable to GOCCs? Well, we say one, the circular itself is not, but the principle behind the regulation that is observing that you do not take advantage of your position of the name of a GOCC for your material interest is the same. The principles are the same. There's a question on whether some regulations of the SEC for PLCs should similarly be required, or are they similarly applicable to GOCCs? Well, at the outset, the regulations themselves we may argue the regulations themselves are not applicable. We defer to the jurisdiction of the GCG on that, but the principles behind them are the same. The principles of ensuring accountability to shareholders, the principles of ensuring transparency to shareholders and stockholders, the principles of accountability of directors and officers. Thank you very much. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Commissioner Brian. At this point, I think we need to have the panel right here up front. And while waiting for them, I just want to thank our panel of speakers, our keynote speaker, plus our guest panelists. Another round of applause for them. And certainly all of the discussions were quite informative, educational, and analytical. So let's have our keynote speaker and our guest panelists up front so that we can start the Q&A. Again, you're encouraged to raise questions either in the chat box or to raise them yourselves. Allow me, of course, to start the first round for our panelists. And allow me to start with our keynote speaker, Dr. Jess, my mentor. Thank you for discussing integrity in governance and anti-corruption as something that is quite serious and yet seems to be a delicate topic. Because of your very extensive experience, Dr. Jess, could you share with us some of the best practices you've seen in other countries relative to elevating the standards of integrity and accountability? Is it the role of, for instance, anti-corruption agencies, or is it, do they, I guess, express louder a sense of outrage? Perhaps if you can share with us, Dr. Jess.
Well, quite a lot of experiences both here and abroad. I've been familiar with the Hall of Fame award given by the Harvard Business School, specifically the consortium led by the authors of the Balance Scorecard. And you have plenty of examples of good governance practices, integrity, transparency, fairness, the ones that have been described by the two commissioners, the GCG and the SEC. The common characteristic of institutions that have really pursued good integrity programs that deliver significant outcomes would be the quality of the leadership and the commitment of the leadership and the ability of that leadership cascade the principles of good governance and transparency and integrity down the line. So the tone at the top, the moral tone at the top is absolutely essential. Unless you have good leadership for the organization that is really committed to integrity and good governance, you cannot really go very far. We have plenty of experiences as well here in the Philippines, where I brought, for example, last May, before Phoenix, MAP, and the Makati Business Club, the work of Commissioner Guerrero of the Bureau of Customs. It's amazing what that guy has done. 3 years. He cleaned up the Bureau of Customs. And that's good leadership. Unfortunately, the guy who succeeded him, perhaps is not as committed. We hope that he will get a higher level of commitment. That's a work in progress. But that underscores the vital, necessary role of the tone at the top. The same thing is true in corporations. Now, all of these systems that we have are being put forward by the GCG and SEC. All of them are extremely helpful and very essential. But at the end, what you need would be people will actually implement them and make sure that in fact this is implemented. That's why in my presentation, I wanted to suggest that Phoenix should work together with PMAP and perhaps MAP so that we underscore this very key point of sustainable governance and transformation programs. And at the very core of it would be the leadership that we find. GCG, for example, is a good example. Under Cesar Villanueva, it has been doing very, very well. He brought it to a very high level. I hope that we can keep it at that high level with the new leadership that has had to come. So that's a very long answer, but both in the Philippines and outside, it's the tone at the top that is very critical.
Thank you, Dr. Jens. That's really a very powerful explanation. It's really tone at the top. Dean Cesar, the father of GCG. You have expounded very well on something that perhaps not many are aware of, that actually the directors and officers of GOCCs and public institutions actually are expected to deliver a higher standard in terms of the conduct of business compared to the private sector. So you talked about extraordinary diligence versus due diligence in the private sector, whereas complier explained in the private sector, it's mandatory and even with criminal liability for GOCCs. What do you think prevents GOCCs from, despite all of these liability risks, so to speak, what prevents them from actually perhaps delivering the highest standards of governance, at least for some? Are there stumbling blocks that you are seeing, or what can be done to really elevate the standards?
Well, there are two items. Two things. In the GOCC sector, there's really no private interest that's involved. Stockholders who will monitor the performance of the board because it is their bottom line that's involved, right? Although the state is the stockholder, the state is just a representative of the people. And therefore you have in the GOCC sector the lack of an ownership, so to speak, of owners of the business, because even public officials know that this is owned by the people and the people are not represented at all. That's one item. That's why the ownership manual is such an important item there. The other one, of course, is that in government, basically, people think that this is there's so much politics, right? And politics will continue to be so. What the GOCC, what the GOCC Governance Act wanted to do is that although the president was the #1 politician, therefore, and politicians are supposed to enact policies, that when he does appoint members of the board, that he does it with a certain political savvy, but with the intention that he appoints among his political colleagues the best and the brightest, so to speak, rather than a maniculista or a hardinero to be appointed in, right? That in the end, he still plays politics because he's the #1 politician, but he appoints the best and the brightest of his political friends.
Thank you, Dean Cesar. Now, Commissioner Gigi, with your awesome powers, you're in a position to actually make the GOCCs lead the way relative to governance, not only for public institutions, but even to serve as examples to the private sector. Perhaps you can discuss, which of the GOCCs are actually top performers. This was actually sent in by a Phoenix colleague. Which are your top performers and what sets them apart? And what is being done to inspire and perhaps compel the so-called less than ideal or laggards in governance? What's being done for those who are not, I guess, keeping up?
Actually, we every November, I think, we award the top 10 GOCCs. We give an award to them and we honor their performance, and also we conduct the sharing of good practices with the rest of the other GOCCs, so that those who are so-called laggards will learn from the front runners. And wag na natin banggitin yung laggards. Ano? Total nandun tayo sa awesome. Doon tayo sa mga top performing. Actually, in 2021, the top performer was the BIC. Followed by the GSIS. Yung pinanggalingan ko. Okay. The Small Business Corporation, the Philippine Crop Insurance Corporation, and then followed by Land Bank, Leasing and Finance, NAPCOR, National Electrification Administration, the Philippine Reclamation Authority is performing very well. Land Bank of the Philippines, the BCBA, and the Cebu Port Authority, the CBC, or the Clark Development Corporation, the Development Bank of the Philippines, and the Power Sector Assets, PISAM, yung Power Sector Assets and Liabilities Management Corp. So that's the top 10 performance. The top corporations who got the topmost grades.
And I suppose for those who are not performing so well, you can also influence their bonuses, right?
No bonus.
No
No bonus for them.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So you need to at least get 90% in the performance evaluation to be entitled to the performance-based bonus. And for the directors, you need to get at least 85% for the you score you to entitle you to the PBI or the performance-based incentive. So over and above the per diems, the directors we may be entitled to the PBI. Kaya hinihikayat ko kayong lahat na may PBI naman na tatanggap over the minimal per diems.
Thank you, Commissioner Gigi. Now, Commissioner Brian, I know that because SEC has a lot to do as because you're supervising all corporations, you're really leaving it much to the GCG in terms of supervision. However, in the case of BSP, you're already harmonizing rules, especially insofar as the governance for publicly listed companies or the banks rather, that you have actually harmonized the rules with the BSP. And at some point, I guess you can collaborate with the GCG. Now, because I think we're running short of time, let me jump right into something that you've mentioned, that you were actually consulted, SEC was consulted in the crafting of the law relative to the Maharlika Investment Corporation. Could you share with us some of the suggestions that you have made relative to the governance aspects for the MIF or MIC?
I was gonna say, don't quote me, but well, I guess at the outset, we say that from the original versions of the bill, we took much consideration the Santiago Principles. And if I may say, for lack of a better term, I'd like to term the Santiago Principles as one way of, as a form of corporate governance code for sovereign wealth funds. And under these principles, you have principles of ensuring transparency, of ensuring a clear governance mechanism, of ensuring clear withdrawal procedures, and ensuring independence. Now, having said that, the SEC, after expressing support for the Maharlika Investment Corporation, seeing that it can contribute to national development, or its potential to contribute to national development, we have proposed, and I think this was carried, provisions on independent directors, provisions on express qualification of the regular directors to be appointed by the president. There was express mention of their expertise and competence on investments, on handling and managing funds. We have introduced provisions on the creation of certain committees like the Audit Committee, the Risk Management Committee, all in keeping with corporate governance principles. we have introduced the idea that this be subject to 10149, subject to certain exceptions, not to give the job to Martinez. We've also removed certain exemptions from the law, such as basically this one's covered by the Procurement Act, freedom of information. You have their disclosure and transparency provisions in the bill. We're also similarly working with economic managers on the IRR and inserting corporate governance principles therein. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, actually, it's encouraging that the law on the MIC or MIF actually mentions that the IRRs are supposed to be crafted in consultation with various stakeholders. So let us keep that in mind. Now, let us, for the next round, let us ask Dean Cesar Villanueva. There's actually a question from the floor as regards whistleblowers and how effective are whistleblowing policies and mechanisms, and how do we make more of the citizens as whistleblowers to help in the cause of integrity in governance.
Okay. I think that it should be Commissioner Martinez who would answer this, because we did establish the GOCC sector whistleblowing policy, and in order to preserve the confidentiality and from being subject of retaliation, a whistleblowing act may be done online, and we did this with the help of the PwC who did that online. It can be done online, and basically, it is how effective anonymity can be preserved that encourages that to be done, right? And but however, when things do get out, it's a common situation where eventually the whistleblowers themselves become the victim of repercussions, and that's nobody likes a stool pigeon, so to speak. Nobody wants to be a stool pigeon, and eventually, remember the agricultural scandal that covered the Department of Agriculture. Most of those who were whistleblowers, they either died or killed, and it's a very dangerous situation, so to speak, right? And therefore, it's also a career blowing, so to speak, because people around you can no longer determine whether, based on your own personal preferences and ideals, that you can be trusted with sensitive matters. So those are the difficult things, right? But there should be a whistleblowing system in place that preserves anonymity to encourage the public to believe so. But the gist beyond whistleblowing is that the members of society, those who are in charge of overseeing corruption and the waste of public funds, are those who are able to monitor this. And this has been done through the e-commerce platform for government and for GOCs, is that they're able to monitor the expenses and budgets and the contracts that are done. So that's the other thing. A vigilant public is the number one whistleblowing policy, so to speak, right? But let me ask how that whistleblowing system in GCG has proven in the GOCC sector. Commissioner Martinez.
Sir, sa inyo talaga yun magsimula. So, but we just strengthened it. I do believe that confidentiality plays a very important role there. And we refer our whistleblowing, what do you call this? All whistleblowers to an integrity division. We have an integrity division under the Office of the General Counsel, who receives all the whistleblowing reports, and confined with anonymity, sir, hopefully, hindi siya makalabas. And then we try to go forward with it and do as much as we can.
What has been the history of taking? Have a lot of people gone through the whistleblowing program?
Yes, sir. Sa totoo lang, yung sinasabi ko before, it needs also to be verified, because sometimes they just complain about their superiors or they have some grudges against a superior officer, and they go through that whistleblowing portal to report. But sometimes it is difficult for us because it lacks the necessary evidentiary matters that needs to be submitted to conclude a case. So I was suggesting that it needs to be verified and accompanied by documentary evidence so that it will make the case more credible.
Thank you, Commissioner Gigi. Now, this next question from the chat box actually is for you also.
I'm really awesome.
In relation to that, okay, let's finish first because Mignon Ramos, one of our very active committee chairs, has a question.
Just a matter of, just a comment because I have some experience, dealing with integrity board. Frequent problem or issue with regard to the handling of whistleblowers is the lack of resources of the investigative body in the integrity board. So frequently, the investigative bodies are hastily put together and not with the proper credentials and civil service qualifications. So some of them are even shared with other departments and do not have the proper accountabilities also. I would really, really suggest that you look into that and properly resource the investigative body and the procedure, the investigative body, as well as the procedures that they undergo in investigating and resolving the whistleblowers allegation. Thank you, Dawn. Allegations. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the suggestion, Mignon.
Yes, thank you very much for that suggestion, and rest assured that I will elevate that also to the commission. Plus, we are also in talks with the Office of the Ombudsman because the GCG does not have contempt powers. The GCG does not have the power to issue subpoena. Sir, nagbilang tayo doon sa part na yon. So, we really are looking into the possibility of entering into memorandum of agreement with probably the ombudsman so that we can use some of their investigative powers and maybe coerce these people through a subpoena, both to testify and for the books that duces tecum, so that we may be able to gather some evidences to support their cause.
That really sends a message. I guess there's another domain first, and then
Of course, can just imagine, whistleblower would have had noticed something or encountered something in the course of pursuing his or her work in the organization, right? But that whistleblower, understandably, will not have full access to the documentary evidence. But he or she is already pointing in the act of doing the whistleblowing act, the proper body towards the direction of where, a thing needs to be investigated, right? So parang if you pass by the burden of to the whistleblower of providing the entire evidence before the investigating body will act, will go nowhere. Because I don't know how many percent of whistleblowers will just do whistleblowing for the sake of complaining against the boss.
I think
Parang, I don't know. At the end of the day, some mechanism must be there. Of course, if the investigation really results in a finding that it's just done for, mischief, then it's mischief, right? But sometimes the mechanism should be there. Because parang where there's smoke, there's fire, right? So that you put it should be there.
Before we call the others, I think Dean Cesar wants to respond to that question.
If you look at the history of whistleblowing, whether here or abroad, you notice that whistleblowers are what we call patriotic martyrs. Because it is they who take investigative forms at the risk of their careers, their wealth, and mortgage payments that they will have to make to do it. So to a great extent, whistleblowers, true whistleblowers, those that have been able to open up the Pandora's box, so to speak, are great patriots, and they do it at great length. Therefore, and you rely upon their inside knowledge or inside information to be able to bring this out, because without that, it's very difficult to do so, right? Now, what the whistleblowing policy or system is supposed to be a deterrent. Until you find whistleblowers of that caliber, where they do the inside digging and work closely with monitors to be able to get the inside information before the cover is blown up to lead. The whistleblowing policy is meant to be act as a deterrent. When people in government or in the public sector know that there's a whistleblowing policy, at least they become a little more reserved in the way they act, because they know that it's possible that there's a mechanism that an ordinary Tom, Dick, and Harry is able to go to, right? And sometimes there's a hit, right? It's possible that there's a hit, especially when we go to the direction where the integrity board or those that employ are beginning to be equipped with the proper resources and manpower and skills in order to be able to take leads, so to speak. But until that's developed, it's really a great sacrifice, so to speak, on the part of whistleblowers who have been able to uncover great scandalous situations.
I just want to say, to remind people, let's not forget Clarissa, who is it, the former equitable executive Ocampo, who actually came out and I guess became a whistleblower. I think you want to comment also on the same subject.
Yeah, just very quickly. Not that I want to volunteer SEC's resources or volunteer commission, but just thinking if there are constraints in terms of, let's say, further investigation, or let's say even the visitorial powers or even the contempt powers. I think for one, SEC has those, and especially under the revised corporation code. So I guess speaking of areas of collaboration, that's something that can be explored by the GCG and the SEC, subject of course to study further legal study. But I guess there's just that power that can be tapped. That would aid, let's say, implementation of the whistleblowing policy.
Thank you. So you see, there's already a result. They want to collaborate already. Thank you, dear commissioners. I think Tony Boy first, and then Terry. Go ahead.
Okay, I just want anybody can answer this now. There is already a proposed merger of land bank. Okay. Now, my question is this: as a director of those two corporations, because there's been pushback from the stakeholders of both government-controlled corporation, meaning to say they have very different mandates. Okay, when the Secretary of Finance mandates, okay, let's merge these two. As a director of this government-controlled corporation, are you allowed to go against what the Secretary of Finance wants if you don't believe in it? How will that affect you? My second question is, on government-controlled corporation, is that there's a 20% independent directors rule hold. Okay? And my third question is, maybe this will be addressed to Attorney William Evans. A few years ago, the Sandigan Bayan also found Senator Villa not guilty, yet imposed that he has to return the money. What kind of ruling is that from the Sandigan Bayan to prevent corruption? It confuses the ordinary person. So those are my three questions.
Ikaw talaga, Tony Boy, sinagot mo agad. But for your first question, we have here a former Secretary of Finance. So I hope Dr. Jess, you don't mind answering the first question on the DDP and land bank.
I happen to have been also the chairman of DBP. And of course, the Secretary of Finance, I was the chairman of Land Bank. So I know both banks quite well. And I was responsible for the rehabilitation of DBP and the charter, which subsequently was revised, but essentially it was the charter of 1986 that we crafted. You're right, the mandate of the two banks is very different. And therefore, to try and combine them with the different processes and very different cultures, one has to really imagine a very, very good reason why you're doing that. Because I say it's difficult, it's well-nigh impossible, and I think it's detrimental to the national interest. Because DVP, quite frankly, has been doing very well. And Land Bank has been doing its job, but to try and force them together would be quite unpatriotic, I would say. Having said that, there was a previous attempt with the Noy administration, with the Secretary of Finance at the time, is a very dear friend, whatever have you. And its main purpose was to gain a lot of money for the national treasury because he wanted to bring the deficit down. I personally think that it's very good to bring the deficit down, but not at the expense of something which can create a lot of problems for the future. It's a wrong reason for doing so. I do not know what is the main motivation now for trying to bring in Land Bank and DVP. I read the paper of the economists of the University of the Philippines. I agree with all of the points that they have. It does not make any economic sense. They're not a group of lawyers, so it doesn't make quite a lot of administrative sense. I do not know about from the legal sense. But having been very involved with DVP and later on as Secretary of Finance, Land Bank, I do not think it is a priority idea that we should pursue and create a lot of difficulties for us, not only now, but also in the future.
And the Cesar for the third question.
The third question is, Tony Boy, basically what do you do when you have a decision like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the legal advice.
No, it's not Secretary of Finance.
Oh, yeah.
Director.
What?
As the director.
If the
Oh.
Secretary of Finance requires them to merge, and you as a director, you are not.
Oh, yeah, that's a question that has been asked when I was chairman of GCG about the move of the secretary to merge and to abolish, let's say, NOC shipping company. Basically, say, don't boards of directors of every corporation, including GOCCs, do they not exercise business judgment to deal what's best for the company? The answer, of course, is yes. Are they bound to follow the directives of the Secretary of Finance when they're under that? The answer is no, because they're bound to exercise their own business judgment to do so, right? Right. However, every director in the GOCC is said to be occupying a political position. And a political decision has been made by the Secretary, for example, of the Secretary of Finance to say, you merge them down and you don't agree. Then, if you don't agree with that, it is your solemn duty to say, we vote against the merger because they still have to go through the merger process, right? Board resolution. That being said, therefore, it's still easy for the Secretary of Justice to say, Secretary of Finance to say, okay, since you don't want to comply with your duty of obedience because this is a national policy, then we're going to replace you, right? And basically, that's a prerogative, right? And therefore, to that person who in the danger of being replaced has given his duty to, you see there, a Filipino patriot who has made public the official stand of what's great corporate governance. And for that, he must suffer because you're not a patriot if you don't lose your life. That's right. And that's what GOCC directors and officers are asked to do, to be patriots, to disagree. But you must suffer the consequences and not insist that, no, I will still sit here because I don't agree with them. Because the political decisions, the policy decisions are really by the office of the president and it's up to them. So that's how they do it. You should. You don't believe in it. And therefore impose to the public an awareness of what is supposed to be. that probably is a deterrent to such political moves that don't make sense, right?
Apologies to our panel and also Terry who wanted to ask a question because I think we're running so late. And there's actually another question for Commissioner Gigi as regarding the timeliness on the responses of GOCC. I guess that has something to do with ease of doing business, but if you could just kindly respond to our Phoenix member who sent the letter and sent the question, and if you could just discuss it separately. I guess how can we compel the GOCCs to respond in time to all the requests? I guess ease of doing business is also related to, I guess, not only integrity, but efficiency in governance.
Yes.
I'm sorry, everyone, because, we're over time already, so I was told to cut it short already. And please, just email your questions and we'll request our panelists to reply accordingly. Thank you so much. A big hand again to our panelists and our keynote speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Actually, we have a lot of questions still coming in, but yeah, unfortunately, we need to close the afternoon's forum. So may I call on the co-chair for Good Governance Committee of Phoenix and my boss, Mr. Rodrigo E. Franco.
Thank you, Risa. Thank you, baby. Thank you to everyone. Good afternoon to our distinguished speakers, our partners from ICD and ISA, my Phoenix co-members, and our guests. I'm supposed to provide the key takeaways of the speakers, but I guess in the interest of time, I'll shortcut it and then go directly to the closing with just a very brief summary of what transpired this afternoon. We at the Phoenix Good Governance Committee have been conducting activities on good governance, the mandate of our committee. We cover several sectors. We have forum and learning sessions on corporate governance. This is for the private sector, but we also have learning sessions on public governance, and on several sessions in the past we've conducted forum on good governance as it relates to national government agencies and local government executives. Just one of our speakers, the previous forum was actually Mayor Magalo. So we featured him a couple of years ago, I think, as a exemplar of good governance at the local government level. And today, in partnership with ICD and ISA, we are presenting another public governance forum, but this time focusing on GOCCs, which is also a very important sector in the public, a very important public sector. And the forum, in terms of the speakers, is well curated because we started with an inspirational speech presentation by Dr. Jess, the most knowledgeable, perhaps, and the most inspiring in terms of good governance. And then we segued into three presentations by three distinguished lawyers. Started with Dean Cesar on the basic principles and concepts of public governance. So that laid a foundation on what public governance is. And it was followed, of course, by Commissioner Gigi on the actual practices of good governance through the GCG. So she shared the policies, procedures, and the awesome powers as described by Dean Cesar of the GCG. And it was capped by, of course, Commissioner Fernandez on the relations and the similarities and between private and public governance standards. I noted Commissioner Fernandez saying that probably the only difference and the only significant difference is the absence of independent directors in the boards of the public sector board. No? There was, of course, a lively discussion, Q&A session, and we ran out of time, unfortunately. The questions have been sent, and we will get the presenters to respond to these questions. So in closing, I would just like to thank everyone for your participation in this forum. I hope all the attendees pick up nuggets of wisdom from this forum. There are actually a lot of learnings. No? Our aim, as I said, was to highlight the importance of good governance, particularly in the GOCC sector. And at the same time, as mentioned by Dr. Jess, not to stop at the level of complaining and criticizing what is happening in the public sector, but to find ways to work together and to get more actively involved in participating in worthy endeavors that will further good governance, not only in the government sector, not only the public sector, but also in the private sector. No? For the GOCC sector, I echo the reminder of Dean Cesar that the fiduciaries of the public sector are bounded by the highest degree of extraordinary diligence. Unfortunately, it puts more burden on our officers, our executives, and our directors in the public sector. So, to counter that, as Dr. Jess said, we should go beyond the level of complaining, and as, if I may add, beyond the level of posting in the social media. There should be more active participation in helping the public sector to also elevate the level of governance. So to close this session today, I would like to thank our distinguished speakers for sharing their valuable time with us, our partners from ICT and INSA, the Phoenix leadership, and the hardworking Phoenix Secretariat for making this forum today a successful one. Thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you, Rep. And of course, we will not let them go yet, no, until we awarded them, give to them our simple token of appreciation. So, Terry.
Yeah, good afternoon. We're so overwhelmed now with this webinar, and we're so privileged and so blessed, no? Because to be in the company of the good governance experts, we can say that's real hope for the Philippines to prosper. And so, quickly, let me tell you that good governance is in the center of our corporate existence, in compliance with the call to action of our mentor, and hopefully not tormentor, Dr. Jess. So our company, although we basically have owned majority of it, we have 7 board members, of which 2 are independent directors in compliance with BSP, 2 non-executive directors, and 3 executive directors. The company has also adopted approved charters for good governance, risk and technology audit, and MALM oversight committee. So this in line with your call to action amongst finance professionals. So we'd like to thank the organizers of this very enlightening and relevant forum. President Wilson Tan, lead organizer and moderator Baby, Baby, thank you for being so passionate. Co-lead organizer and co-chair Rod Franco, Chair Cathy Ann, Vice Chair and MC Risa, and Phoenix Secretary Mike Lin Vizcaya, Mike Binduan, and Mylene. Thank you to the board members and other representatives present here, and those who attended, a total of 204, another blockbuster in Phoenix history. And so another big round of applause for everyone. And it's with great pleasure at this point, we express our profound gratitude to our most esteemed keynote speaker and the three resource speakers, and towards a more substantive collaboration of private and public sector. So may I call on Chair of Center for Excellence in Governance, Dr. Jess Stanislaw, just to read the certificate of appreciation in recognition of his generosity in sharing his valuable time, knowledge, and insights as a keynote speaker during this forum, Enriching Public Governance in GOCCs, signed by Wilson Tan, President of Phoenix. Attorney Cesar Villanueva, Chair of Institute of Corporate Directors, he is also a fellow trustee in GRI. So, certificate of appreciation to Attorney Cesar Villanueva in recognition of his generosity in sharing his valuable time, knowledge, and insights as a guest speaker during this forum, Enriching Public Governance in GOCCs. Attorney Geraldine Marie Berberabe Martinez, Commissioner of Governance Commission for GOCCs. Certificate of appreciation to Attorney Geraldine Marie B. Martinez in recognition of her generosity in sharing her valuable time, knowledge, and insights as a guest speaker during the forum, Enriching Public Governance in GOCCs, signed by Mr. Wilson Tan. And of course, Attorney Jill Brian Fernandez, Commissioner, Securities and Exchange Commission. Certificate of appreciation awarded to Attorney Jill Brian Fernandez in recognition of his generosity in sharing his valuable time, knowledge, and insight as a guest speaker during the forum and reach public governance in GOCCs. Thank you, everyone, and have a blessed day.
It has been an awesome afternoon with awesome people, with awesome powers, and may the force be with you. Thank you, and we're adjourning this forum. May I request everyone in front, please, for a group photo? Sige po. Dito daw po tayo sa harap. Yeah, can we have a group picture here? No?